Hello and welcome. Today we're looking at a topic that never fails to stir up strong emotions. Youth crime. But instead of relying on prejudices, we're looking at facts. Specifically, the facts from one of the most important long-term German studies on this subject. So let's dive straight in with the question that's constantly floating around. You hear it in the news, you read it in the headlines. But what's actually behind it? Let's take a look at what science has to say. And to understand all of this, let's start with ourselves. Let's be honest, who among us didn't do something stupid in their youth? Maybe you slipped something small into your pocket at a shop, or broke something somewhere. That's a reality most of us are familiar with, right? And this is where things get really important. The study, Crime in the Modern City, doesn't just look at the so-called bright field, that is, what actually gets reported to the police. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Instead, it shines a light into the dark field, all the acts that are never reported. And it does this by surveying thousands of young people directly and anonymously. Only then do we get a truly honest picture. Now hold on tight. The study found that around 70% of 18-year-old males have stolen something at least once in their lives. 70%, that's 7 out of 10. This makes it crystal clear. Minor rule-breaking in youth is not the exception, it's almost the norm. It's a near-universal phenomenon. Okay, so if it's that widespread, what happens to all these people? Do they all become hardened criminals? Spoiler, no. Let's take a look at how things develop. The data shows an absolutely clear pattern. Criminal behavior peaks during the teenage years, around 14 or 15, and then drops off steeply for the vast majority. This is the famous age crime curve, and it can be found all over the world. Criminology even has a name for this phenomenon: spontaneous desistance. It sounds complicated, but it means something quite simple. The vast majority simply stop on their own. They grow out of it, without the police or a court ever having to intervene. That is the norm. And the reason is fairly logical, isn't it? You grow up, and suddenly other things take priority. Your apprenticeship, your first job, maybe a serious relationship. All of that becomes more important than the thrill of before. You integrate into society. But, and this is the big question on everyone's mind, what about those who don't stop? The ones we always hear about in the media. Let's look at what the data tells us about this small but very prominent group. The reality the data reveals is quite striking. At the age of 15, for example, fewer than 10% of boys are responsible for 5 or more acts of violence per year. In other words, a tiny minority commits an enormous share of all offenses. And the study itself puts it plainly. This small group of repeat offenders, the so-called prolific offenders, are the real problem. Not young people as a whole. And that brings us to the most important question of all. If most young people grow out of it naturally and only very few don't, what makes the difference? What are the decisive factors? You hear it constantly in heated debates. Often, one thing gets pointed at very quickly: migration background. But is that actually true? What does science say? The study looked at exactly that. And the results, well, see for yourselves. Among 15-year-old boys, there are essentially no notable differences. Whether they have a migration background or not, the rates for violent offenses, serious theft, and property damage are almost identical. So what does that mean? Quite simply, the myth that background or culture are the decisive causes of youth crime is completely disproven by the data. It is simply not true. Instead, the study shows us the real risk factors. And they have nothing to do with nationality. It's about environment. What kind of friend group do I have? How strong is my connection to school? What's the situation like at home? And crucially, what prospects do I have in life? Those are the things that truly matter. Okay, let's bring it all together. What does all of this mean for how we should talk and think about youth crime? Essentially, we need a 3-step course correction. Step 1. Accept that criminal behavior in youth is usually a normal, temporary phase. Step 2. Expose blanket accusations against entire groups for what they are: wrong and dangerous. And Step 3. Focus on what actually helps. And this is perhaps the single most important takeaway. Relying solely on punishment and exclusion often makes problems worse. What actually helps is prevention, strong social bonds, and real opportunities for everyone. Support and integration solve problems, repression does not. And that leaves us with one final question to reflect on. If the evidence is this clear, why is it so incredibly hard to get rid of these stubborn prejudices? Knowing the facts is only the first step. Changing perceptions, that's the real challenge. Today's episode was based on a study by Boers and Reinecke from 2019. Do you have questions or topic requests? Feel free to write to me at YouTube at EmpowerMigra.com. EmpowerMigra, understanding begins with listening.